Angus Young, how you doing?
Good, Becko.
The Offspring.
How's it going, Becko?
Dave Grohl, how you going, mate?
Good, man.
Pete, it's been a long time coming.
Oh, Becko, hasn't it indeed?
We go inside the dressing room, speak to the biggest names in music,
Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones.
and crack open their esky.
That's exactly how I imagined you, by the way, sitting opposite me with a vodka and orange.
You're a discerning chap. This is The Rider.
Hey, it's Becko. Welcome back to The Rider. After a quick 6-month break, time to get back onto it and interview some of the great music stars who are getting around and releasing new music at the moment. Tell you what, some great gigs that have been happening lately. I saw Incubus with Live a few weeks ago, and in fact, that was just an incredible surprise. Incubus were on fire, playing a lot of covers, which really surprised me. And of course, Live, bringing it home. I think it's one of those bands where you don't always tell your mates that you're excited about seeing live, but they were fantastic. And also this weekend, this is a gig which I don't think anyone was expecting to happen. Pandemonium. Already Melbourne and Sydney done and dusted. Of course, the controversial Anzac Day performance got moved to Homebush, and this weekend it's Gold Coast and Brisbane with Psychedelic Furs and, of course, Alice Cooper and Blondie. And, of course, don't forget Wolf Mother as well. We a little bit disappointed that Placebo didn't make it, but that's a pretty solid performance, though. A pretty great lineup. And I've got to say congratulations to Andrew McManus, who really had it against him. People were saying it wasn't going to happen, and sure enough, this weekend, the very first Pandemonium wraps up.
This is The Rider.
There's some great new music coming out at the moment, and this one just came out of nowhere. I had no idea they were working on new stuff over there in Perth. I'm talking about Jebediah. And don't forget, 1997, Slightly Odway was the album which came out, and it was so distinctive. We'd never seen anything like it before. I always compared them to a bit of Rat Cat when I heard this song, Leaving Home. There was Military Strongman. It's been 13 years since their latest album. They got in that studio in Perth and recorded Kosciuszko. You remember this track? That was She's Like a Comet, which came off the album Kosciuszko. And they've gone back into the same studio 13 years later with the same producer. And it's such an incredible album. It's called OIKS. I'm going to find out from Kevin Mitchell what actually is OIKS, by the way, but also the first single was Motivation. Gum Up the Bearings sounds like straight up, standard, solid Jebediah. Rubber Man, also another great track you've got to check out. And Don't Stop. In fact, the entire album has been incredible. I've been listening to it non-stop for the last couple of weeks. We got him on the line from Perth, and he's in his home studio right now, Kevin Mitchell. There he is. G'day, mate.
Aloha.
Hey, how are you, mate?
I am good.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
Mate, congrats on the album.
Well,
it's bloody awesome, by the way.
Thank you. Cheers. Yeah. Look, it's a relief and not a surprise, but it's a relief that we got there in the end. It took a long time.
So how long has it been complete? Because I know you sort of said you were starting off as far back as 2018 in a way, the very early stages of jamming and just seeing what happens. But how long have you had it in the can for?
Only I guess probably by the end of 22. I think it was pretty much done. And then we spent 23 just figuring out, or just getting all the logistics of who was going to put it out and all that kind of stuff, because we did it all independently and finished it all ourselves. And then we were able to start sort of putting songs out by sort of late last year. So, I think really, I guess it took 4 years between 2018 and 2022.
Must be a weird time where you've pressed send and you've decided on the track listing and all that kind of thing, and there must be a moment where you text everyone and go, "Are you guys sure? Any last minute changes, or you're all good?"
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can see why you would think that, but there wasn't really. I mean, I guess it's our 6th record, and and because we've been around for such a long time. I don't know. I guess I think you do start to get to a point where, or for me anyway, I get to a point a little bit where it's just like, it doesn't feel like, this is a record that's just like, this is just encapsulates us here and now. It's not like, I don't think it's going to be the last record we ever make. I hope not. It's not going to be the last record I ever make. And it's certainly not the first. And so I think you tend to kind of relax a little bit more about these kind of things. Like there's not so much pressure. Like it's not, those first couple of records, it's like it's your whole life, and after a while, I don't know, I've just started to kind of have a bit more perspective on things um and just kind of, I think I have a better kind of concept and understanding of what these records really are in the grand scheme of things. And it's a project that we put a lot of time and love and effort and money and stuff into over the last few years, but it's, it is what it is.
So 13 years ago was the last album, Kosciuszko. And it doesn't feel like it's been that long, though, because you have been touring. And I saw you, spring-loaded, I think, middle of COVID in Sydney, and that was great to see you on stage then. But you've had the Bob Evans project as well, so it doesn't feel like at all like it's been that long. No,
it doesn't at all. I guess part of that is probably like an age thing as well as you get older. But yeah, 2011, I suppose, I've put out a couple of Bob records since then. Jeb's, we spent 2015 doing a lot of stuff like around a sort of 20th anniversary of our band, and did a heap of touring, and then of course, having gone through COVID, I think, for a lot of people, we've felt that COVID has kind of created, it was such a weird it created this weird sort of time vacuum. And sometimes I find it very hard to place, like, something that happened before COVID. Sometimes it feels like, 20 years ago.
Well,
I can't place what happened. Those 2 years are such a weird sort of blob of time. Sometimes I find it really hard to place like what happened when,
2018, you went to the studio with the band. Was there any plans for that, or was it just one of those things where let's just go in and just see what happens?
Yeah, it's exactly what we did, and it's something that we wouldn't have ever entertained doing previously. I think we I think we just got to a point where we had the confidence to be able to take that kind of risk, because what we're essentially doing is taking a total risk on our chemistry, still being alive and kicking on a creative level. So in 2018, we decided to book a studio for like 5 days, and we went in with no songs. And the idea was that we would all set up in the live room of the studio, mic up everything, and just like jam for 4 or 5 hours, like we would normally do in a rehearsal room, but just hit record and just let the computer record everything. And then the next day we would come in at lunchtime, we'd spend a few hours listening back to everything that we'd done, and we just kind of sort out what bits were good and what, throw out the bad stuff, put all the good stuff to one side, and then work on like those kind of ideas that we liked and see if we can turn them into songs, or maybe, two completely separate ideas from the same night. We might go, well, can those two ideas work together in the same song? And so we kind of figured we'll just do that for a bunch of days and sort of cut and paste things together and see what results it yields. And sure enough, we must have had about 20 songs, not finished, of course. Some of them are just ideas, but we had enough there for us to kind of go away from that first session going, okay, well, I feel like there's an album to be made here. And then as we kept coming back and regrouping and working on the stuff that we had before, of course, we were coming up with new stuff all the time. And so we, those later sessions kind of yielded these songs that were very much kind of studio creations rather than us setting up and playing in the room together. So you've got songs like Gum Up the Bearings and Motivation and stuff, which are very much, and Bad for You, this first song on the record, which are all very much kind of the sound of us in a room together. But then you've got stuff like Rubber Man and Don't Stop, which is the complete opposite of that. It's just, we've never even played those songs together. live once before. We just pieced them together bit by bit in the studio without ever getting in a room together and playing it.
That explains why every single song feels like it's got a different identity almost, like Going Up the Bearings was like the Clash to me. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Were you inspired by anything from the Clash, or you've been listening to the Clash?
Yeah, a lot of people mention the Clash, but to me, it's for us that song is more of a homage to Archers of Loaf than it is to the Clash. But I mean, I can totally hear the similarities. But obviously people are a lot more aware of who the Clash are than Archers of Loaf, so maybe it's an easier comparison to make. But but yeah, I mean, that is obviously a good kind of example of a song that when the four of us are together and we feel like making a racket, that's the kind of song that kind of comes out pretty easily,
Yeah,
pretty quickly.
Whereas Rubber Man, to me, felt like it could have been a Bob Evans song quite easily, or even Tame Impala.
Oh yeah, like it's a little bit psychedelic and yeah. I mean, it's definitely could it's kind of veering into Bob territory, but a bit more sort of weirder, I suppose, than any of the Bob stuff that I've done. But yeah, certainly that song kind of came from me. I started that song sort of on my own and kind of built it up, and the other guys came in later and added their stuff. So yeah, it's definitely got a different identity, I suppose, to a song like Gum Up the Bearings. But I think it's all still, all the songs, regardless of how they started out, all the songs have kind of are like sausages that have gone through the Jebediah kind of factory. They all kind of come out sounding like Jebediah, I think, in the end.
Oh, mate, it's a super album. By the way, I've got to ask, OIKS, where do they come from? What is OIKS?
OIKS is okay. So this is the story. So I was reading an interview one day of my good mate Tim Rogers from UMI, and we were playing on a festival together, or we were about to go on tour together, because the interviewer asked him what his first impressions of our band was. And he described us as being like a little gang of oiks. And I'd never heard, I had no idea what oiks meant. So I looked it up and came to learn that I think it's a Victorian era kind of English word to describe like, an oik is like an uncouth youth, or like, I guess it would be like a little street urchin. It kind of brings to mind like Oliver Twist, kind of, little troublemakers on the street corners. And so I just, I liked the sound of the word. I liked what it meant. It kind of fits with the kind of theme of Jebediah record titles, sort of being sort of wonky sounding words. And I also kind of, it came to kind of take on even more meaning for me over time, because, as I've been, promoting the record over the last week and doing lots of these interviews and talking a lot about it, I've come to realize that, a lot of what this record represents, I was talking about how we came in with no songs and we were really relying on this chemistry being there to make this record. And what we found is that even after nearly 30 years of being together, and even having not written songs together for quite a few years, we went into a room, we closed the door, the rest of the world doesn't exist, there's just the four of us. And we go back to being the teenagers that we were when the band first started. And I think a lot of people could probably relate to that, because it's probably similar to when you catch up with a group of your school friends, perhaps that you haven't seen in 20 or 30 years. And it doesn't take long before you start kind of telling the old kind of in-jokes, and you sort of start reverting back to your old, identities and stuff from way back. It's kind of like that when you're being in a band. So, we sort of go back to being that little gang of oiks that Tim described, even though we're all sort of pushing 50 now, in that environment. So yeah, I guess that oiks has kind of come to represent a few different, it's come to represent a bunch of different stuff for me now.
He's got a great way with words, Tim Rogers. He's the modern day poet. And it must pinch yourself sometimes, because you go on tour with these guys and you see them at venues and stuff. And I mean, totally look up to UMI, and there must be so many bands you've also pinched yourself and gone, oh my God, I can't believe we're in the same room.
Yeah, well, I mean, to plug the tour that we're going on tour with Magic Dirt this year. through July, August, September. And now Magic Dad are another band like You and I who, I can remember the first day that I heard their music, going around to Vanessa's house. This is before Jebediah were even a band. Going around to Vanessa's place and she had Magic Dirt playing on the CD player. I was like, what's this? And, that's how I discovered them and fell in love with them. And then, within the first year of the band forming, we got to support them. It was the first time I'd ever seen Jebediah on like a shiny post strip, like a poster on the street and everything. And we were kind of intimidated by them as we looked up to them so much. And, and now we've become friends and we're doing this tour together after all these years. So yeah, there's loads of those kind of moments. And, I think what that really sort of brings to light for me is, now that as I'm getting older and still doing it after all these years, is you realize like what a gift all that stuff is. And if you hang around long enough and you're able to kind of ride out, the whatever kind of obstacles and low patches that this kind of life brings you, and if you're able to stay together as a band, and then there's a great payoff at the end of that. It's like these long friendships, and these great opportunities to do things that if you quit, we would have missed out on. So yeah, that's what I'm really feeling now with that. But yeah, there's a band like Tumbleweed were another one. Rat Cat, they're all bands that I idolized when I was a kid, and they're all people that I now count as friends.
What an
Which
era
is
it
pretty
was.
amazing.
It is
Pretty
amazing. And I think looking back at the Jebs, and I remember hearing, leaving home, I think when I was 17, it was my graduation year from high school, and that puts me in that bracket. And that was such a great era for Perth bands after that. It's almost like you were right at the beginning of this incredible golden era of bands to come out of Perth. I just think of, you got Little Birdie, and you got the Sleepy Jackson, and obviously the Eskies. It was a great music scene over there. Was part of that because you were stuck there almost, like it was always the progression to make it big and then move to Melbourne.
Yeah, well, this is something that obviously for a long time was these kind of questions were being asked. And so, I've been sort of forced to kind of reflect on it. And I think the general consensus seems to be that when we came along, Perth, WA bands had sort of always moved to Melbourne or Sydney, or they'd just gone straight to London or whatever. A lot of well-known WA bands like the Triffids and Stems and that kind of stuff, were very popular in the 80s and stuff, but everyone left Perth. And I think like when we came along, we decided we were going to stay. We decided that we weren't going to relocate to Sydney or Melbourne or go overseas. We were going to stay where we were in Perth, and we were going to try to get as successful as we could get without ever moving. And I think maybe the fact that we were able to do that hopefully kind of gave other bands, made other bands realize that they could do it too if that's what they chose to do. Now, there's no right or wrong way to do things, but I think it's been really great for West Australian music that there's been all these bands that have become really successful all around Australia. We've got like big national bands like the ones that you mentioned, and of course, it reached its zenith with Tame Impala because they're not just one of the biggest bands in Australia, one of the biggest bands in the whole world, and they stayed in Perth. Well, pretty much stayed in. I mean, they're never there, really, are they? They're always touring around the world.
Always touring, yeah.
But so I think that's been really good for WA music because there hasn't been that drain of artists leaving. And we were lucky, because we signed to a label, and so we had some financial support, to help us with all the flights and all that kind of stuff. And of course, these days, with the internet and everything, that opens up all these other opportunities to sort of have your music heard outside of your own city as well. But yeah, I think if bands, if artists generally stay in their home city or they stay in their home country, because you can broaden this to an international level and talk about Australian artists as well. If you're able to stay in your own country, and lots of artists are also able to do that, then I think it helps give that place a really strong identity, and I think that now, like you mentioned, people people, if you say to someone, who are some WA bands, people could reel off a handful of them pretty quickly without thinking too hard, and that may not have been the case, prior.
Yeah, I agree. And like I moved to Perth 2001, and I was able to sort of go out and be a part of that. And obviously, Freo's music scene was incredibly vibrant. And I don't see the Jebs as being an iconic Freo band though. I see the Eskies as, but
yeah, we never really. I mean, we grew up south of the river, so we were, Freo. For those of people who don't know Perth, Freo's sort of south of the river, and the city Perth is, or the city as everyone calls it, is north of the river. So Fremantle was kind of our stomping ground, but I suppose when we were sort of getting a national audience, we always talked about Perth, being from Perth, because I think to be any more specific than that was almost like going too far.
Yeah,
I mean, like it was enough of a novelty that we were even from the state of Western Australia at that point in time. So I think perhaps, for bands like Eskimo Joe, like you mentioned, and bands after that, to identify as like, no, we're not just from WA, we're not just from Perth, we're from Freo. I think just, if anything, that speaks to just, how much awareness there was, I suppose, and how many bands from that area were sort of getting a national audience that you could even get that specific, and it would be relevant. For us when we started out, I don't think it would have been relevant for us to get that specific about where we're from. It was just like, yeah, we're from WA.
has it been good that you haven't been living, in each other's pockets as a band? Like you said, you got back in the studio, and after a while, you start to gel and you start to go back to your old personalities. That's obviously key to the fact you're still around.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've stayed friends, and we've been friends since we were in high school. So, that friendship has survived. But yeah, we're not in each other's pockets like we used to be when we first started touring. And this is no exaggeration. We would, we'd fly to Brisbane or Adelaide or wherever, and to start a tour, and we'd get in a van, and we'd basically just tour in a van for like a month and go across all of the eastern states, and Tasmania or whatever. Do like a full tour, and then after 5 weeks we'd come back to Perth, and I guarantee you that the first weekend back we'd be calling each other, going, "Hey, what you doing? Hey, where you going? What bands are you, or what pub are you going to? What band are you going to?" We're like, and we'd all be hanging out together again within like a matter of days, because we all had the same group of friends. We all came from the same social kind of circles. And so we really did like live, we were like family, like brothers and sisters. And it was like that for many years. It was only sort of in the, by the time we sort of got to the early 2000s that started to change. We all started to grow up and kind of, getting relationships and all that kind of stuff. And now, of course, some of us, well, I'm married and I've got kids, and, some of us live in Victoria and some are still in Perth or in WA, in Freo. I should say, because Vanessa, getting back to the Freo, I mean, Vanessa in our band, I mean, she has always been staunch. I mean, she is the archetypal Fremantle person. I mean, she, more than anybody I know, she's been living in Fremantle since she moved out of home when she was 18 or whatever. My best memories of just leading up to the band starting was me and Chris, would go around to her apartment in Fremantle, and she would introduce us to so much music. Some of my favorite bands, were being in her apartment, listening to CDs and having a good time with things. And so yeah. Anyway, that's a free aside. But yes, getting back to the in each other's pockets thing. Yeah, perhaps the fact that we're not sort of in each other's pockets so much anymore, and we're still able to kind of reconnect as friends in the studio and make new music. I think it just says a lot about the history and the bonds and the connection more than anything, And like I said, it's like family, or the band is kind of like the family that you choose, kind of. It's one of those scenarios. And there's so much history there that yeah, I think that it'll always, be that way until one person decides that they don't want to do it anymore, and that'll be the day the band ends.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. And I mean, do you feel like you're a better musician now than at the very beginning? Like, of course you are. You're a better, you're a better guitarist, better singer.
There was only one way to go.
Yeah, I know. I just realised what I was asking. I mean, but I guess the thing is, because you are a better musician than you were, say, when Slightly Odway came out or whatever, do you ever think, I'd love to do that one slightly differently?
I mean, I don't anymore. I mean, for years after making Slightly Odway, I could never really listen to it. Because it was such an awkward exercise of I just critically analyze. I couldn't listen to it without being overly critical about everything. Not just from the sound of my voice to the production, the guitars, even the songwriting. Everything to me just sounded like wasn't good enough or whatever. But it probably took into my 30s before I realized that a lot of the things that I was critical about were the things that people loved. Like, and it was the stuff that made us sound like us and different to everybody else. So that was the stuff that in my younger days, I felt insecure about because I'd hear Jebediah would come on the radio after, Soundgarden or I don't know, just like some kind of band from that era and I just think, oh God, like, we're so scrappy and not polished or slick at all. And, it sounds so amateur and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, with enough time and distance and not listening to it for ages. And then in my 30s, I came back to listening to it again when we did our 20th anniversary tour and we played Slightly Away in full for the first time ever. And so we all had to listen to the record to learn some of these songs again. And that was when it kind of hit me. Enough years had gone by and I was like, I think now after all this time, I think I get it. I think I get what the appeal was. And yeah, like I said, a lot of it was stuff that were the very same things that I felt kind of insecure about in the early days. I'm a different person than I was back then, but I'm certainly a very different musician. I think the one thing that hasn't changed is just that love and just that sort of enthusiasm. Like, I'm still really enthusiastic about making music. I still get giddy and excited about it. And I think it's that enthusiasm that probably is the main driver. I'm not, and I never will have been, and I never will be a virtuoso on guitar, I'll never be able to sing like Tom York or Chris Cornell or whatever. People don't come to see Jebediah because they want a lesson in that kind of stuff. So enthusiasm, it can really get you a long way.
It was such a distinctive sound, and it did stand out when Triple J played it for the first time. And you're right, it was next to Spoon Man by Soundgarden or something. And your Bob Evans stuff as well, so different. And you did that tour last year with mixed in with Kevin versus Bob, and which I think is the first time you've done that, isn't it? Where you've done some Jebediah songs with Bob Evans.
Yeah.
And you're going to keep doing Bob Evans? I mean, I think there was a bit of a rumor getting around that was maybe going to be the last tour, but I don't think so, right?
No. I'll always, I mean, whether I continue under the Bob Evans name or not is sort of a run. Every time I make a record, I think to myself, am I still going to keep doing this stuff as Bob Evans, or do I just start using my own name? But no, I mean, Bob Evans is basically it's really my main creative avenue, really. When you consider it's taken over 10 years for Jebediah to make a record. It's what most of my kind of creative time goes into. So yeah, Bob Evans will always be a vehicle for my solo stuff. And also, it's that freedom I get being able to pretty much do whatever I want with the Bob Evans thing, so it's always going to be pretty different to Jebediah. But yeah, that tour that I did last year, when it was called When Kev Met Bob, and I basically played sort of 50% Bob songs and 50% Jeb songs. And yeah, it's something I'd been thinking of wanting to do for a long time, but I was always sort of holding it back, waiting for it to feel right. And it's got to the point now where it kind of feels like that distinction that I created by calling myself Bob Evans and keeping Jebediah and Bob Evans really separate. It worked really, really well, but it's kind of played out now. Like it's done its job. Like it doesn't. But the Bob Evans thing and the Jebediah thing are both very well established in their own. They've got their own kind of lanes. And I don't need to I don't feel like I need to keep trying hard to keep that separation now, or it's not like a secret anymore. It's so that tour was actually a huge amount of fun, because not only was it sort of coming out of COVID and not being able to tour for a few years and being able to kind of get back to some sense of normality, but also starting a set with a song that I wrote as a teenager, a Jebediah song, and being able to play everything from my entire back catalogue, my entire history of both things combined. It felt amazing. It was a very different feeling coming off stage. Kind of felt, shouldn't really come as a surprise, but I felt a very real sense of wholeness.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not joking. I'm actually joking.
No,
it sounds
like
had dinner.
Keep doing that.
Had dinner.
Cry.
I'm not crying. But yeah, so it felt great, and to do it, because whether it's Bob Evans or Jebediah songs, that's my history. That's me, in song since I was a kid. So yeah, it's something that I want to keep doing more of.
Well, look, it's great to have you back for your 6th album, and it doesn't feel that long, like I said, 13 years, but it's out now. It is a beautiful creation. All songs very, very different, but incredibly polished as well. And I know you recorded it all in the same studio as Kosciuszko back all
Correct.
that time ago. So I guess it's like going in there and it's got the same sound and same smell and same producer as well.
Well, no, you're right. Yeah, I mean, Dave Parkin is the guy who runs Blackbird Studio. It's his studio in Perth, and yeah, it's where we did Kosciuszko. And even though a lot of years have gone by since we did Kosciuszko, so many ways, like going back into that studio and working with Dave, it kind of felt like we just picked up where we had left off. And Kosciuszko, at the time, that was, we experimented a lot on that record, and that was a pretty big leap forward for us at the time, I felt. And so I felt like this record it feels like a pretty natural kind of next kind of step after Kosciuszko. It does share a lot of kind of sonic qualities. The two records do occupy a bit of a similar space, I reckon, but just because it's got that same producer and same sound. And but I feel like OIKS is just kind of pushing things just a little bit further out into the water, than Kosciuszko. Kosciuszko is a pretty tight song and pretty poppy too. This song's probably goes off in way more different directions.
Yeah, but I absolutely love it. And look, congratulations. And we're going to see you on the
man.
road in July as well with Magic Dirt.
Awesome.
And are you going to get back in the studio for some rehearsals and all that kind of thing? I'm sure you will to blow out the cobwebs.
Well, that's right. We've got to learn of some of these songs, some of these new songs. So we've only played a couple of them live so far. So yeah, we'll have to rehearse up a bunch of them. And yeah, it's going to be great. Can't wait to do this tour with Magic Dirt. It's going to be so much fun.
All the details online on the Jeb socials. Kevin Mitchell, great to speak to you. Have a great night.
You
Thanks for your
too.
time, mate. We'll see you on the road soon.
Thanks, buddy.
There he is, Kevin Mitchell from Jebediah. Check out the new album, OIKS. Listen to it over and over and over again is fantastic. And, of course, their tour kicks off in July on the road with Magic Dirt. All those dates on their socials. Give the rider a follow, whether you're on Spotify or iHeart, Apple, and back again very soon with Cav from Eskimo Joe. They've got new music out. We'll talk to him soon. This is The Rider with Becko. Catch you then.